City Slickers is still one of the funniest, most heartfelt Western comedies ever made. So let's take a look behind the scenes of the film with 20 things you didn't know about City Slickers, such as how it almost looked very different, why the original ending was cut, and everything that's been announced so far about City Slickers 3. So the inspiration for City Slickers first came to Billy Crystal when he was at home one night watching TV, where he happened to turn on a documentary about a group of friends going on a fantasy vacation. And this prompted him to pick up a notepad and begin writing the outline of a story about 3 middle-aged friends who go on a fantasy cattle drive together, before eventually having to take over after their crusty trail boss unexpectedly dies. Crystal then took this concept to writers Lowell Gans and Babaloo Mandel, who helped him flesh out the idea and got straight to work on writing the screenplay. And not long after, Ron Underwood was brought on board to direct, who they viewed as the perfect choice for an action comedy western, given they had just broken onto the scene with the 1990 cult classic Tremors. So while developing the story for City Slickers, Billy Crystal and his fellow writers thought it would be a good idea to watch some classic westerns for inspiration. And this apparently included films like the John Wayne western Red River, that features a fictional account of the first cattle drive from Texas to Kansas. They also watched the classic 1953 western Shane, in which the actor Jack Palance famously stole the show as a deadly gunslinger. Also, many fans have since pointed out that the plot of City Slickers is very similar to the 1972 western The Cowboys, in which a group of inexperienced cowhands are forced to take over a cattle drive following the unexpected death of their grizzled trail boss. So when it came to casting City Slickers, Billy Crystal opted to play the main character of Mitch Robbins himself, making it his first major film role since his award-winning performance in When Harry Met Sally. And as for the character of Ed Ferrillo, they decided to go with Bruno Kirby, who initially seemed like a perfect fit for the role, until the actor later realized that he was allergic to horses. But even so, the actor refused to back out, and apparently took allergy shots every day in order to carry on filming, which proved to be such a miserable experience that he decided it was for the best that he not return for the sequel. And finally, for the character of Phil Berquist, they decided to go with the comedy legend Rick Moranis. But in the midst of preparing for the film, the actor was unexpectedly forced to quit for personal reasons, opening the door for Daniel Stern to take his place. However, this gave the actor very little time to prepare for the role, which actually ended up adding to the authenticity of his character, given that he genuinely didn't know how to ride a horse. Now, by far the most important casting in City Slickers was for the character of Curly, a gruff, no-nonsense trail boss. And it turns out that from the moment that Billy Crystal came up with the character, he had always envisioned him being played by Jack Palance, who had left a lasting impression on Crystal ever since he went to the cinema for the first time to watch Shane. But unfortunately, due to a scheduling conflict, Palance wasn't available, leading Crystal to instead send the script to the legendary Western actor Charles Bronson. However, upon reading it, Bronson was so offended by its contents that he called up Billy Crystal to say "F you," explaining that he has no interest in playing characters that end up dying, even though his appearance in The Magnificent Seven would suggest otherwise. But luckily, in the end, Jack Palance cancelled his other film commitment and was officially cast as Curly, just like Billy Crystal had always envisioned. So it's no secret that City Slickers had a very impressive cast, but it also managed to assemble a really talented group of individuals behind the camera as well. For instance, they hired Dean Semler as the director of photography, who had plenty of experience filming westerns, having previously shot both Young Guns movies as well as Dances with Wolves, for which he won an Academy Award. Also, for a stunt coordinator, they hired industry legend Mickey Gilbert, who'd previously worked on westerns like The Wild Bunch, Joe Kidd, and Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid, in which he famously served as Robert Redford's stunt double. City Slickers also ended up featuring quite a few notable cameos. For instance, Mitch's daughter Holly is actually played by his real-life daughter Lindsay Crystal, and Mitch's son Danny happens to be played by a young Jake Gyllenhaal in his first ever film role, years before his breakout performance in Donnie Darko. Also, the film briefly features actress Yeardley Smith, who is famously the voice of Lisa Simpson.
And I'm not a little girl, I'm 20.
So given that Billy Crystal both wrote and starred in the film, it's to be expected that he would put a lot of himself into the movie. However, some scenes were directly lifted from his own life. For example, during the scene in which Mitch reveals the best day of his life, he talks about the first time that he was taken to the Yankee Stadium by his dad, which was actually a real memory from his own childhood. Equally, the scene in which Mitch gets a call from his mother each year at the exact time that he was born, again is inspired by a real-life tradition from his own life. So given how personal of a film City Slickers was to Billy Crystal, it might seem like an odd choice for him to wear a New York Mets cap throughout the movie, given that in real life he was famously a New York Yankees fan. And the reason for this was because Crystal already had a good working relationship with the Mets, after they did a favor for him by hosting comic relief in New York. So during the filming of the opening ball running scene in Spain, the stuntman that features was initially sent a Mets outfit to wear as a placeholder, which led to it being used for the rest of the film to maintain continuity, with the one exception being in the scene where Mitch reminisces about going to the Yankee Stadium. Now, although City Slickers was a comedy first and foremost, everybody involved in the film went above and beyond to make it look and feel as authentic as the classic Western movies that inspired it. As such, City Slickers was filmed in New Mexico, Colorado, and California, using very little CGI or special effects, meaning that they had no choice but to bring in hundreds of cows in order to portray a convincing cattle drive on the big screen. And ironically, the only scene that was faked happened to be the one that looked the most convincing, because many people still believe that Billy Crystal birthed a real-life calf for the purpose of the movie. But the truth is that the scene was actually achieved with an anatomical replica of a cow and a jelly-covered calf that had already been born a few days prior. So as a result of their commitment to authenticity, City Slickers proved to be a really difficult movie to film, given that they were genuinely having to herd cattle every day on set. But the part of the movie that was by far the toughest to shoot was the river crossing scene, because in order to make it look convincing, they had to lead hundreds of cattle down a muddy hillside and across a fast-flowing river. And to achieve this, they set up nets downriver from bank to bank to catch any animals and actors that might get pulled away by the current, all while soaking them in water from a fire hose to simulate a rainstorm. And although the cast were given wetsuits to wear underneath their outfits to keep them warm, the actors were all left bruised and exhausted from the shoot. So despite the difficulties of filming City Slickers, over time the central trio really got the hang of being cowboys, much like their characters in the movie. In fact, between takes, they would all practice herding the cattle, becoming so proficient at it that they would actually move the cows between shooting locations themselves. And Daniel Stern enjoyed this element of the movie so much that he actually went on to buy his own ranch and a herd of cattle. Billy Crystal also loved his time working on the movie, and really took to his on-screen horse, Beechnut, who formed a genuine bond with the actor while filming. And as a result, the horse ended up being gifted to him, with the pair reuniting on screen from the 1991 Academy Awards. So one actor that was more than familiar with a Western film set was Jack Palance, who received a standing ovation upon stepping onto the set for his first day of filming. But shortly after, the veteran actor angrily snapped at director Ron Underwood, startling the cast and crew as well as Billy Crystal. Although, after the pair started filming scenes together, Crystal formed a really good friendship with Palance, seeing firsthand how talented of an actor he really was. And it was at this point that Palance revealed that his earlier outburst had just been a case of first-day nerves, having apparently snapped at Tim Burton in a similar fashion while shooting Batman. So Palance mellowed considerably over the course of the shoot, sharing poetry and singing for the rest of the cast, revealing that he even once released a self-titled album.
I'm the meanest guy that ever lived. I spit when others cry.
So once City Slickers was done filming, there were actually very few scenes left on the cutting room floor. But one exception to this was a sequence that takes place right at the end of the movie, after the trio discover that the cattle they herded to the ranch are going to be sold for beef. So the next morning, Mitch and the others use the coffee maker to herd the cows to freedom out of compassion, effectively becoming cattle rustlers in the process. This led director Ron Underwood to question the morality of the scene, so much so that he decided to remove it from the film altogether. So on June 7th, 1991, City Slickers officially hit cinemas and went down a storm with critics and fans alike, with many applauding the film for the way in which it managed to perfectly balance goofy humour with poignant life lessons. For instance, Roger Ebert said, "City Slickers comes packaged as one kind of movie, a slapstick comedy about white-collar guys on a dude ranch, and it delivers on that level, while surprising me by being much more ambitious and successful than I expected. This is the proverbial comedy with the heart of truth, the tear in the eye along with the belly laugh. It's funny and it adds up to something." So even now, City Slickers is generally considered to be one of the best Western comedies ever made, having aged remarkably well for a movie that's now over 30 years old. Now, despite its positive reception, City Slickers still had quite an uphill battle to make an impact in 1991, given that it was releasing in a year full of heavy hitters, such as Terminator 2, Robin Hood, Home Alone, and Silence of the Lambs. However, as a result of the positive buzz around the movie, upon its release, City Slickers managed to bring in a whopping $179 million on a budget of just $26 million, becoming one of the top 5 hits of the year in the US, outgrossing the likes of The Addams Family, Backdraft, and The Naked Gun 2. It even managed to top Dances with Wolves, a classic western that went on to win Best Picture at the Oscars later that year. Now, despite its undeniable success at the box office, being a Western comedy, City Slickers was always unlikely to get all that much recognition in terms of awards, especially in a year that featured so many groundbreaking films. Yet even so, Jack Palance won both a Golden Globe and an Academy Award for his iconic performance as Curly, which felt deserved given his undeniable contribution to cinema up to that point, for which he'd never really received any official recognition. So when you consider just how successful City Slickers was at the time, it was inevitable that it would lead to discussions about the possibility of a sequel. And so, just 3 years later in 1994, City Slickers 2: The Legend of Curly's Gold hit cinemas, which was a direct continuation of the first film that reunited much of the original cast, with the plot focusing on a quest to find hidden treasure with the help from Curly's twin brother, Duke. And although it proved to be a mild financial success, City Slickers 2 was widely panned by critics and fans, even getting nominated by the Razzie Awards for the worst sequel that year. Now, as disappointing as the sequel was, it doesn't seem as if it's done any lasting damage to the reputation of the first film, given that you can still see its impact on pop culture all these years later, such as in The Muppets, American Dad, and Modern Family, just to name a few. Billy Crystal and Daniel Stern even recently returned for a mashup sketch that combined City Slickers with the Westworld TV show.
Oh, this can't be good. Are we in detention? I don't know where the hell we are.
So given the nostalgia factor still associated with City Slickers and the current trend of remaking popular films from previous eras, it probably shouldn't come as a surprise that there have actually already been discussions about a new City Slickers. And when asked about the project, Billy Crystal said, "I don't know how serious a talk is, but there's a little bit of a discussion about it. What would it be? For me, that it would have to feel like it was not a sequel, but a movie that could stand on its own." So based on this, it would seem that if a new City Slickers movie does go ahead, it's more likely to be a reboot or a remake, rather than just City Slickers 3. So with that being the case, let me know below, what are your thoughts on the idea of a new City Slickers? Do you think the franchise is best left alone, or can you think of any good ideas of how a new entry might actually work? Also, as always, if you enjoyed the video, it would be great if you could leave it a like, and while you're here, you might also want to check out this video right here.